Mrs. Ifunaya loved her job as a teacher. She was young, hardworking, and passionate about helping students learn. When she was assigned to teach at St. Sapphire, she was so excited, but the excitement quickly waned when she met the students of her class. The girls in this class were not like other students. They were rich, powerful, and spoilt. Their parents were politicians, business people, and government officials. They believed no one could touch them and acted just like it. It started with small things like coming to class late, talking while the teacher was in class teaching, or ignoring teachers' instructions. One day, Amarachi, who was the leader of the group, stood up in the middle of the lesson. "Mrs. Ifunaya, go and get us some bottled water. We are thirsty," she said with a smirk. The class burst into laughter while Mrs. Ifunaya froze in shock. She did not know what to do. Amarachi glared at her. "Are you deaf? I said get us water." Mrs. Ifunaya felt her legs move before her mind could even think. She left the class to fetch the water, and after that day, the bullying got worse. Amarachi treated her like a servant. She made her carry her books, fetch her snacks, and even copy her notes. "Make sure it's neat," Amarachi would say, throwing her notebook on Mrs. Ifunaya's desk. The other teachers whispered about it, but no one dared to help. The principal turned a blind eye because he was afraid of Amarachi's father. The girls smacked Mrs. Ifunaya in front of everyone. They laughed at her clothes, her shoes, and even her voice. During one session, Amarachi said loudly, "Why is your voice shaking? Are you scared of us?" The whole class laughed as Mrs. Ifunaya's face turned red. She felt small, powerless, and ashamed. Exam time brought more trouble as Amarachi walked up to her desk after class and said, "I want to see the exam questions." Mrs. Ifunaya shook her head. "I can't do that." Amarachi leaned closer and said, "If you don't, my dad will make sure you lose your job." Tears filled Ifunaya's eyes as she handed over the questions. The girls bragged about how easy the exams were whilst other students struggled. One day, things took a different turn. Amarachi peeled juice on Mrs. Ifunaya's desk and said, "Clean that up for me." The class laughed as she scrambled to clean the mess. Another day they recorded a video of her fumbling with their demand and posted it online. The video went viral and Mrs. Ifunaya became a laughingstock. She cried every night, dreading the next day, but not everyone in St. Sapphire was cruel. In came a quiet girl who sat at the back and had been watching. She didn't come from a rich family like the others. She knew how it felt to be powerless. So one day, Amarachi told Mrs. Ifunaya to shine her shoes. Before the teacher could move, Ekum stood up. "Stop it," she shouted. The class went silent. "What did you say?" Amarachi asked shockingly. "I said stop it," Ekum repeated. Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. "You've bullied her enough. She's a teacher, not your servant. You should all be ashamed of yourselves." The class mummed, but no one summoned the courage to speak. Ekum stood up to Amarachi, asking if she knew how hard it was to be a teacher. "Do you know how much she has sacrificed for us? And this is how you treat her?" she asked, staring Amarachi in the eyes. As she scoffed, Amarachi, filled with rage, walked up to Ekum and gave her a very hot slap. "How dare you stand up to me? You daughter of a nobody. I will show you that your life and your future are in my hands. Or you think I don't know that you are one of the recipients of my father's scholarships? We pay your fees." And with a snap of my fingers, all this could be gone. Amarachi said to Ekum, who did not seem too fazed about her threats. "You can take away everything, but one thing you can't take away is my dignity," she said to Amarachi, who was now full of rage. Ekum walked up to Mrs. Ifunaya to see if she was fine, and Mrs. Ifunaya thanked her greatly for her bravery. However, she was worried for Ekum's safety, knowing how vicious Amarachi could be. All the teachers and students made sure to stay away from Amarachi, knowing what she was capable of. But Ekum did not seem to care, despite knowing that she was poor and unable to match Amarachi. One morning, Ekum arrived at school and was met with cold stares from her fellow students. She wondered what she could have done, but no one dared to come close to her. When she got to her classroom, she saw pictures she never knew were taken of her. It was a picture of her mother lying next to a gutter in the pool of her own vomit as Ekum tried to assist her home. Ekum's mother was an alcoholic, and Ekum had tried everything possible to stop her from drinking. But her mother always went back to the bottle. The picture had been printed and taped all over the classroom walls. Above it, a crow message was written, "Daughter of a drunk." Ekum froze in her tracks. Her heart pounded as laughter erupted in the classroom. She looked around, her eyes swelling up with tears. Amarachi sat at her desk smacking. How does it feel to have your dirty secret out in the open? Amarachi said aloud as she stood up. You think you are so brave standing up to me? Well, now everyone knows the kind of mother whom you come from. Ikem clenched her fist, trying to hold back her tears. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but she knew it would only make things worse. Amarachi wasn't done. Maybe the school should start a new scholarship for orphans of drunkard. You'll be the first to apply, or the class bursted out into laughter. Again, Mrs. Ifunaya walked into the classroom a moment later and froze at the sight. She immediately saw the posters and the one off the wall. In the staff room, Mrs. Ifunaya tried to comfort Ikem. You are brave, Ikem, she said. Don't let them break you. Your mother's struggles don't define you. You are strong and you have a bright future. Ikem wiped her tears and nodded, but deep down, she felt broken. She didn't know how much more she could take. Mrs. Ifunaya wished there was more she could do, but her hands were tied, seeing that even the principal lacked the balls to call Amarachi to order. This emboldened Amarachi, who intensified her bullying and began to punish her class teachers, who knelt down by her desk whenever she was dissatisfied with anything that they did. During lunch, Amarachi walked into the cafeteria and spotted a younger student there eating quietly at the corner. Amarachi strolled over and stared at Ada's food. Is that jello fries? She asked, her voice dripping with mockery. Ada nodded timidly. Good, I'll have it, Amarachi said, snatching the plate from her hand. Ada tried to protest, but Amarachi raised her hand. Don't even think about it. You should be grateful I didn't slap you, she said. As Ada sat back down, she watched Amarachi eat up her food in front of the other student. Next time, bring me a better meal, Amarachi said as she walked off. One morning during the school assembly, Amarachi spotted Ikem standing in the middle row. She whispered to one of her followers and they burst into laughter. Amarachi raised her voice so everyone could hear. Headmaster. She called out, why do we allow people who can't even afford proper uniforms to stand with us? Look at Ikem. Is this a school or a charity? The assembly fell silent as all eyes turned to Ikem. Amarachi continued, her voice loud and mocking, maybe we should all donate so she can have a proper uniform. The crowd erupted in laughter and even the teachers stood frozen, unsure of how to intervene, and Ikem's face burned with humiliation. But she refused to cry. She clenched her fist, determined not to give Amarachi dissatisfaction. Amarachi's reign of terror in the school seemed unstoppable. Each day her bullying grew bolder and her targets increased. After the incident at the cafeteria with Ada, Omori strolled through the hall as if she owned the school. No one dared to challenge her, even the teachers. Every single authority avoided confrontation with her. The once vibrant school had turned into a place of silent fear. Mrs. Ifunaya, unable to withstand the humiliation any longer, decided to take action. After school one evening, she took a stroll to the principal's office to have a word with him. Sir, we need to talk about Amarachi. Her behavior has gone too far. She's tormenting all the teachers and students alike. How can we sit back and watch her students punish her teachers? It is not done anywhere. Amarachi is now out of control and we really need to nip the problem at the board. The principal sighed deeply. Unsure of what to do, Mrs. Ifunaya, I understand your comment, but my hands are tied. As you can see, Amarachi's father is one of the top politicians in this country and Amarachi happens to be his only child. The last time a teacher flogged Amarachi in this school, her father dealt with the teacher mercilessly and almost shut down our school. That girl is a very spoilt brat that we have no other option but to manage. After all, she only has a few months left with us. Please, you all should endure till she leaves. Mrs. Ifunaya felt her heart sink at the principal's words. She could not believe that the entire school system had been reduced to helplessly enduring Amarachi's tyranny. Frustrated but unwilling to give up, she left the principal's office feeling defeated, but more determined to protect her dignity and that of her students, especially those who were constant targets of Amarachi's bullying. One morning during a test, Amarachi ripped up her test paper claiming that Mr. Wale, the math teacher, had no right to give her a test that he didn't provide the answers to beforehand. I'm not prepared for this test and no one would write the test until I'm prepared, she said, angrily ordering Mr. Wale to kneel down before her and apologize. If you don't want to lose your job, you'll kneel down now and apologize. The humiliation of kneeling before a group of teenagers broke something in him, but like the others he endured. That same afternoon, Amakai entered the staff room and dropped her notebook on Mr. Wale's desk. I didn't do my homework, she said casually, telling Mr. Wale that he was going to do the assignment for her. You do it for me, she said as Mr. Wale looked up shocked. I can't do your homework, Amarachi. That's not how it works. Amarachi leaned in, her tone stern. Do it or I'll tell my dad that you beat me up in class. Let's see what my father is going to do about that. Mr. Walle, faced with the threat, reluctantly opened the notebook and completed the assignment. The other teachers in the staff room exchanged helpless glances, knowing that they too were just as powerless as he was against Amarachi's threat. Amarachi's reign of terror continued unchecked as no one dared to confront her. One afternoon during a chemistry practical, Amarachi snapped at Mrs. Abigail, the chemistry teacher, for not preparing her lab equipment quickly enough. "Do I look like I have time to wait for you, slow hands?" Amarachi shouted angrily. When Mrs. Abigail tried to explain, Amarachi stood up and knocked over a tray of beakers. "Clean it up now. While make sure that you're cleaning gutters for the rest of your life." Humiliated and frightened, Mrs. Abigail quietly cleaned the mess whilst Amarachi strutted back to her seat. Just as the lesson commenced, Amarachi interrupted the class again, waving her phone. "Mrs. Abigail," she called out loudly, "is it true that your husband doesn't even have a job? I heard you're the one feeding him." The class busted out into laughter, and Mrs. Abigail froze in shock as she felt so embarrassed by the revelation. "I don't think a teacher like you has the right to teach us chemistry. How can someone who can't even handle her home teach us chemistry?" Amarachi smiled. Mrs. Abigail, too shocked to respond, continued with the practical, her hands trembling as she held up a beaker. Amarachi smacked and added, "Maybe if you had married a richer man, you wouldn't look so tired all the time." Mrs. Abigail had never been this embarrassed in her life. She had a son who was way older than Amarachi and could not believe that Amarachi would dare to speak to her in such a degrading manner. Tears swelled up in her eyes as she quietly tried to focus on the class, but her confidence was shattered. The students, emboldened by Amarachi's behavior, whispered and giggled behind her back for the rest of the lesson. All the teachers began to count on to the day that Amarachi... The class laughed as Chiamaka's face turned pale from embarrassment. From that day forward, Amarachi terrorized her life in the school. She spread rumors that Chiamaka stole snacks from the school cafeteria and called her a peanut thief in front of the entire school. The bullying escalated one afternoon when Amarachi accused Chiamaka of stealing her notebook in class. "You poor thing," Amarachi snarled. "Can't even afford a textbook, so you have to steal mine?" When Chiamaka denied it, Amarachi slapped her so hard that Chiamaka stumbled into her desk. The classroom fell silent as Chiamaka's ears rang. The slap left a lasting damage to her ear, and Chiamaka began to struggle with hearing a few days. Later she stopped coming to school, and Amarachi showed no remorse for what she did. "Good ridding," she said, when a classmate mentioned Chiamaka's absence to her. "She doesn't belong here anyway," she said, laughing at the fact that a groundnut seller sent her daughter to a school like this. "How am I not even sure that her mother is not a thief like her to afford such a school as this?" she said, mocking Chiamaka and her family loudly for everyone to hear. The classroom erupted in laughter, with no one daring to challenge her. Even the teachers who had witnessed the incident remained silent, fearing the backlash from Amarachi's influential father. 4 days. The school carried on as if nothing had happened, but beneath the surface, tension was brewing. Chiamaka's absence was reported to the principal, who dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "She will come back when she's ready," he said, as no one there wants to escalate the issue further. One morning, just as classes were about to begin, the sound of heavy boots echoed through the school compound. A convoy of army trucks pulled into the gate, and soldiers marched towards the SS3 classrooms. The entire school froze in shock as the soldiers entered Amarachi's class. "Where is Amarachi?" The leader of the soldiers beaconed. Amarachi, sitting confidently at her desk, stood up and smirked. "Do you know who my father is?" she asked, her voice dripping with arrogance. The soldiers ignored her. They grabbed her by the arm and began marching her out of the classroom. "You all are making a huge mistake," Amarachi shouted as she struggled against them. "Do you know who I am? My father will destroy all of you." The principal, alerted by the commotion, ran to the scene. "Officers, what's going on?" he asked, his voice trembling. "We have strict orders to take this girl to our headquarters," one of the soldiers said coldly. "Contact her parents if you want more details." The principal quickly sent one of the teachers to accompany them to the headquarters, but he dared not to stop them. The students and teachers watched in stunning silence as Amarachi was bundled into the truck. Her cries of protest faded as the truck sped out of the school premises. Speculation spread like wildfire. What could she have done? Students whispered. Some thought it was related to her father's shady dealings. Others believed her bullying had finally caught up to her. Even the principal looked nervous, unsure of what this meant for the school. Her father caught wind of all that had happened and hurried to the army headquarters. His anger boiled within him. As they arrived the premises, her father, a well-known politician with significant influence, stormed into the army headquarters with a convoy of his own, determined to get his daughters released. Amarachi's mother followed closely, visibly distressed. The air in the waiting area was tense as the family demanded to see the officer in charge. A tall, standing-looking officer stepped out of his office. "Good afternoon, Mr. Oka," he said, addressing Amarachi father without a trace of deference. "We have been expecting you. What is the meaning of this, mister? How dare you dare to lay hands on my daughter? Do you know who I am? I'll have you and your entire team dismissed." "I would love to see that happen, Mr. Oka," the officer said as he remained unflinched. Mr. Oka had never been this disrespected in his life. As he felt his anger rising, he picked up his phone and made a phone call to the army chief, who told him to stay put, that he was on his way to the headquarters. Mr. Okaya stood there hurling insults at the officers, unaware that his every word was being recorded. His arrogance filled the room as he shouted, threatened, boasting about his connections, and promising to ruin everyone involved in his daughter's arrest. Meanwhile, Amarat, "You've been under investigation for months. You've been hiding, using your influence to evade arrest, but it ends today." Mr. Oka froze, his face pale. "What nonsense are you talking about? I came here for my daughter, and now you're accusing me of what?" The Secret Service officer stepped forward, holding up a warrant. "We have evidence of your involvement in corruption, embezzlement, and other crimes against the state. Your daughter's behavior, while irresponsible, is the least of our concerns. We've been waiting for you to surface, and thanks to her actions, you've walked right into our hands." Amarachi and her mother gasped in disbelief. "This is a setup," Mr. Oka shouted, but the officers didn't flinch. They moved swiftly, placing him in handcuffs as he struggled and protested. "You can't do this. My connections." "Your connections won't save you now," the Secret Service officer interrupted. "You've caused enough harm, and it's time you face justice." As Mr. Oka was escorted to one of the SUVs, Amarachi broke down in tears. Her mother clung to her, sobbing uncontrollably. The once powerful family now faced the reality of their downfall. Before leaving, the officer in charge turned to Mrs. Eunice, who stood silently watching the scene unfold. "Well done, Agent Eunice," he said with a nod. The revelation shocked Amarachi, who did not know that the quiet and timid teacher who she had constantly bullied was actually an undercover agent with the Secret Service. Amarachi's arrogance and bullying had inadvertently drawn her father out of hiding, allowing the Secret Service to apprehend him after months of evasion. Back at the school, word spread quickly about the dramatic event at the army headquarters. The students and teachers were stunned to learn the truth about Mrs. Eunice. Some felt a sense of vindication knowing that Amarachi's reign of terror had contributed to her family's downfall. The school, now free from Amarachi tyranny, began to heal slowly. Chiamaka returned, welcomed warmly by her classmates, and Inikums bravely inspired others to speak up against bullying. Amarachi, meanwhile, was sent to a juvenile correctional facility. Stripped of her privilege and influence, she was forced to confront the consequences of her actions. Her father's trial became a national spectacle, exposing years of corruption and abuse of power. The downfall of the Oka family served as a powerful reminder that no one is above the law, and justice, though delayed, is inevitable. The lesson to be learned from this story is that parents should train up a child in the way that they should go. Children must be taught to respect others regardless of status or background, and to understand the value of humility, kindness, and accountability. Wealth and privilege, when misused, can lead to ruin, as seen in Amarachi's case. Furthermore, the story highlights the importance of courage in standing up against injustice, as shown by Ikem and Chiamaka. It teaches that silence in the face of wrongdoing only empowers the oppressors. Ikem's bravely, though costly, inspired others and was a catalyst for change. For schools, the lesson is clear. Institutions must prioritize fairness and justice over fear of influence. The principal's reluctance to act allowed Amarachi's behavior to escalate, endangering both students and staff. Authority figures must always uphold their duty to protect and educate regardless of external pressures. Lastly, the story underscores that no one is above the law and actions have consequences. Amarachi and her father's downfall served as a reminder that justice, though delayed, always catches up. It is a call for accountability at all levels and a testament to the fact that integrity and discipline are more valuable than power and privilege. With the Oka for family's fall, the school found peace. Each staff regained their dignity and students learned to value respect and humanity over fear and power. I hope you enjoyed the story. Please like and subscribe to support a small channel like ours if you made it this far. Comment the lessons you learnt in this story below, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.